Hello, fellow Araxians. In defense of Planetside 2, this video is almost exactly 1 year late. Originally, it was going to be a very labor-intensive video that I really wanted to tackle because I just saw a disturbing trend, but I just never got around to it. Real life and all that stuff, you know? And then as Planetside sort of petered off over the course of last year, I kind of just saw that it would be too little too late. And with the announcement of Planetside Arena, a lot of what I do feels like a moot point now. But this very necessary rebuttal video has sort of been sitting there as a halfway idea for a long time, and it needs to be completed. And another awesome content creator for PUBG that goes by the name of Wacky Jackie did some work that suddenly makes this video a lot easier, so that also gave me the boost I needed to complete it. One thing Planetside has always suffered from is getting trashed on social media, especially YouTube. And I don't think a lot of people really understand how much of an anchor it is for the game. How much it affects less knowledgeable players' perceptions about the game, and how it projects this negative perception of the game to the greater gaming community. The people that would be potential planet men and planet womens. Now there is 100% always room for constructive criticism, and Planetside is a game ripe for opportunities of that. But what it needs more than that is people willing to come and defend it at the appropriate times. And that's something that didn't really happen enough throughout its lifespan. Now 2 years ago, the game got one of the worst thrashings of its life, and a large portion of the community got on board with that. And a while later, when I got around to it, I put up a rebuttal explaining all the errors in that review. And one of the major areas was a guy named Buzzcut Psycho that didn't understand the history of Planetside and the company that produced it. He made the assertion that SOE and Daybreak Games came by the Planetside IP secondhand. They were given it, which is incorrect. It was built from scratch by this company. And while we're right there, I want to clear up the record a little bit. I get comments like, "Oh, everything changed when Daybreak Games bought Planetside from Sony," which is a nonsensical comment because the company didn't change. It's still the same people. Yes, they went through a round of layoffs before that transition, but they went through the layoffs as Sony. And then the company was renamed and sold. But it's not like they hauled all the people out of the office and then hauled a whole different team in when they changed the name of the company and they sold it. All that happened is the ownership stake moved to Inception Acquisitions LLC, some of the management team was shuffled around, and the studio continued on as it was. For example, Andy Seitz, who was the producer of Planetside 2 for a while, is now an executive producer, and is the executive producer of Planetside Arena, was a tester for the first game in the series, going on 22 years ago now, Tonorus. And even though the company has gone through 5 different name iterations, it is the same company that built Planetside from scratch. Yes, personnel are added, subtracted. The creative directors for each game have changed over time. The company is different than it was 22 years ago, but the company name and the ownership of it are not really what made those changes. That's just businesses evolving. So I don't recommend getting hung up on who sold what and when a name changed. So anyways, after clearing up that misunderstanding, he posted a comment on my video, which actually perfectly sums up a lot of areas people like to complain about the game. And again, there's plenty of areas to complain about the game, but these are areas that come up a lot, which aren't actually major concerns, but do significant damage to the game in terms of its perception to the greater gaming community. Now, his post never went up, even though he tried to post it 3 times. When one of his outfit mates confronted me on the problem, I explained that all he had to do was change the last word in his post and it would stick. YouTube has very simple moderation tools that allow you to hold comments for review that have racism or homophobia. For whatever reason, he wasn't willing to do that to actually get his voice heard. I would have happily pinned his comment for a period of time so there could be discussion around it. He can still dish the insult, I'm just not willing to make an exception to the rule of no homophobia. But those 3 attempts to paste that comment have sat there as the only 3 comments in my moderation queue since, because they're the perfect summation of things that are not worth complaining about regarding Planetside 2. So let's dive into it, shall we? Not really relevant in this discussion, but the first thing he talks about is the lattice system. If the hex system was really bad battle flow, the lattice system moved it up to just very bad battle flow. The lattice system was spoken of as it made some seriously positive change to the game, which it did not. Is it a step above the hex system? Sure. I know some people prefer the hex system, but there is an undeniable problem of Cyrious ghost capping. But even with the lattice system, there is an undeniable problem of zerging. And macro and microflow is something that's very easy to get off into the weeds in. Just this first assertion that the lattice system somehow made serious improvements is not grounded in the reality of the battle flow in Planetside 2. So then he goes on to consult the Steam charts and draw a parallel from the drop in initial launch population to that means the game is terrible. And sure, obviously every company wants their game to come out and to be popular and stay popular and get more popular. But the reality is, by a wide margin, the games that come out and trend up are the abnormality. It is extremely normal for games to launch, have big debuts, and then peter off for the rest of their life. Check out The Division, for example. Or you can take a look at the trend in For Honor, or pull up Fallout 4. And this goes on and on and on. You could do this for a lot of games. Yes, some games made it. Rust, Dota, Warframe. They have, on average, trended up over their lifetime. They're very successful titles. But the amount of titles that are still carrying on, loved by many, but have been in a downward trend since launch, far outnumber them. And Planetside 2 is in that same boat. We all wanted it to make it to that Warframe status, where it just kept bringing on more and more people, because that means more and more development, more great things for the game, more technological and performance improvements, and developers putting in the time to really be able to finish the title. So yes, Planetside 2 has trended down over its lifespan, but that does not point to terrible developers. That points to the boom-bust business developing video games. So, marching onward to the next topic that I see tons of people complain about, that has been blown out of proportion over the lifespan of the game, and that is cheating. Let me set the record straight. There are some cheaters in Planetside 2. In the card section of this video, I'm going to throw up a link to an aimbotter I ran into, and there have been other infamous hacks that have made their way through Planetside 2. This was a popular one for some time, where guys would clip into a box in a base, and they made the engineer turret rapid fire. They could launch like 10 of the engineer's guided mana turrets projectiles within a second. I do want to stop for a second, and this hacker was a guy that spoke English. He was obviously a native speaker. And not only that, he followed the community. He knew who I was on the subreddit. He had obviously hung out there. I've seen some presumption on people thinking what type of people are the hackers. I just want to point out that they come from anywhere and everywhere. They are not unique to any locale. Here's another hack that was around for a while, a collision hack, where hackers could set up invisible obstacles where you would randomly suicide into. That one they got fixed pretty fast. And then something else that I sometimes see misconstrued as hacks are exploits. This is your underground reavers or your underground liberators. These are not people that are modifying the game files in any way or using third-party programs, but are getting vehicles under terrain they're not supposed to be able to, and then killing people from below.
13.
I'm gonna let him kill me and then clip this for the use. There we go.
Those are the people that are rolling around intentionally getting in vehicles under the train and killing people without remorse. This Valkyrie I'm sure was a complete accident, but it's an example of how people might end up under the train, and you can see here, it is possible to shoot up from below and damage people. So if you ever find yourselves in one of these accidental situations, don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong. It only transitions into exploiting once you start killing people down there. When you see these blatant hacks, guys, the best thing to do is just type /report and send it off. I know it feels like you're just sending a message into the void to never be seen by anyone, and that may be true, but that's your best avenue of defense. Now, I spent a lot of time defending Planetside 2, so I've been accused of being a fanboy plenty of times. I just want to point out that I see reality. When there's a hack, I call it a hack. The problem is, I see a lot of people falling into the pit of haccusating everyone, anyone that is better than them. Haccusations run rampant in Planetside, and that has far more to do with the fact that there's no matchmaking than that there is actual hackers. I would be willing to bet money on the fact that 99% of the hack reports for aimbots that Daybreak Games gets is really just people reporting good players rather than hackers, which makes the issue of trying to get the hackers all the more difficult. So the final hacker category that I want to talk about, and the one that Buzzcut Psycho spent most of his time on, is people that modify their hitbox, allowing them to hit headshots even if they don't actually hit the head. And this is the hack that I think a lot of people in the community think is very prevalent. Now, the ability to modify the hitboxes was around since launch, but it was Reddit user PS2 StopHack that very clearly brought it to the front and forced them to do something about it. The team at Daybreak, led by Andy Seitz, responded and thanked him for his work. Now, they fixed the current client so you cannot perform this hack on it, but people with old files were still able to modify hitboxes. And this is where it went bad because players drastically overestimated just how many people were doing it. In the process of trying to bring attention to it, there was a little bit of a witch hunt. A legitimate player got named in this post, and he ended up having to post footage just to vindicate himself. And there was another video from PS2 StopHack explaining how it was still possible to modify hitboxes using old game files. Now, while it is possible to modify the hitboxes, it is detectable as well. So Daybreak Games was banning these people in waves. But this time around, Prompt Critical stepped in and we actually got some numbers. Over the course of 3 months leading up to the episode 4 of PS2 StopHack, about 20 people used the hack. That's it. 2-0. Of the hundreds of thousands of the active users in the player base at that time, 20 of them had modified their hitboxes. The next time a guide for using this hack was posted on a cheating website was about 8 months ago. This time, over the 2-week period after that guide was posted, only 6 people used it. These are staggeringly insignificant numbers of hackers. PUBG has gone through months where 1 million hackers got banned. Blizzard had to ban over 20,000 players just in South Korea in one wave. Look guys, the reality of gaming is hacking is big business. And every company out there has to face that battle, and every game has to face the challenge of hackers. But compared to the industry, Planetside 2, the devs have faced that challenge and done a terrific job. While hacking does happen in Planetside, it is not one of the game's major problems. It is an ongoing battle they handle very well. I think some people will say, but Cyrious, you just spent 8 minutes talking about hacking and how hacking does happen. You showed clips of seeing it in game. But the fact of the matter is, guys, I just showed you everything. Over 6 years and thousands of hours played, hackers have occupied 0.000001% of my time in game. It's a very reasonable number. Unfortunately, when people run into one, it's a very tainting experience, and it tends to cloud everything else they see in the game. But just because that one experience tends to stick out, does not mean it's a common occurrence, and does not mean it's rampant throughout Planetside 2. So in his post here where he brings up the INI file edits as if they're a big deal, that part's wrong, and then he also says it's not detectable, which is also incorrect. Look guys, just because someone can hack the game, doesn't mean Daybreak Games not watching, and it also doesn't mean that there are a lot of people doing it. The hackers pop up in isolated scenarios, isolated accounts, and they are dealt with as swiftly as possible. Daybreak Games did try to create an automated system to deal with them, but the player base rejected it because they wanted to make sure they could smurf without risk of getting banned. So that system had to be disabled, and we now rely on BattleEye generating reports which humans in the customer service department can then act on. Unfortunately, that does mean a hacker can ruin a server for a night, but the decision to do it that way rests on the player base, not Daybreak Games. And then so after he brought up hacking as one of the major failures of the game, which it's not, he then brought up the rate of fire based on frame rate as if it's one of the major failures of the game, which it's not. Let me be clear here, guys. You're at a disadvantage if your performance is bad. That is every PvP game out there. That is not unique to Planetside 2. Now, I've felt this effect. Everyone could kind of feel it's there. I never spent the time to put a finger on it and see just what the differences were. But you know where else I've felt this effect? Literally every other game that has projectile weapons. Funky things happen when your performance is not great in games. This is the place where I'd have to install a bunch of games, go do a bunch of testing, and come back with the proof. Thankfully, Wacky Jackie just did that for me in PUBG. If someone wants to go make a stir on Apex Legends, I bet you're going to find the same issues. You start limiting your frames and you're going to see fire rates start going down. Just make sure whoever does that Apex Legends test and gets that Karma Gold mine gives me a shout out. Look guys, I'm not a software engineer, but these games are complicated as fuck, with millions of lines of code. And then let's throw the fact of a Planetside 2 fight out there. And we'll harken back to the old days when pops were high. And let's say you've got 150 versus 150 battle going on, and everyone's walking around with 600 RPM weapons. Just think about the sheer amount of projectiles that are flying everywhere. Look, if the giants of the industry, like PUBG, can't avoid rate of fire drops associated with FPS drops, and they've only got 100 people on a map, max, and they're super spread out, player base has to be able to excuse a few imperfections in Planetside's rate of fire. Furthermore, I can count on one hand the amount of fights that I lost due to my rate of fire. Whether you win or lose is based on your shot placement, your burst control. It is such a rare scenario that you win a fight because you are able to spit out more bullets faster. The far more common scenario is how many rounds did you hit and how many rounds hit the head. And then my final argument on this topic is the NS-15. For those people that are not convinced that this flaw in the game isn't a serious handicap to them, even though it's all in their head, then I simply point to the NS-15. Especially like when maybe a TR faction starts belly aching that their faction trait is high rate of fire, so they're disproportionately affected by this issue. In the end, the NS-15 is a great equalizer. It is an extremely competitive weapon, and everyone has access to it. And that goes for the majority of the NS weapons. If you somehow feel that high rate of fire weapons are at a disadvantage because of this fundamental flaw in most FPS games that use projectiles, then just use these weapons and know the playing field has been leveled. So fellow Araxians, there are certainly areas for complaints in Planetside 2, battle flow being one of the largest, but the amount of cheating that goes on in Planetside 2 is minuscule, and those that do, Daybreak Games deals with swiftly and effectively. And the issue of rate of fire falling when your FPS goes down is a struggle that a lot of game developers face. It's a complicated topic that maybe one of the developers out there will find a solution for, and that will proliferate throughout the industry. But for now, unless you're running above 45% accuracy on weapons that are above 600 RPM, its effect on your gameplay will be next to nil. Let your finger off the trigger, work on your burst fire, and you will be pushing down your actual time to kill, regardless of your weapon's TTK at any given frame rate. Buzzcut Psycho is a veteran Planetside 2 player that has a lot of valuable feedback to offer, especially when it comes to leading platoons and leading outfits. He's brought a lot of good discussion surrounding Planetside Arena, albeit with more vitriol than was necessary. But I was pretty surprised to see him get duped by a lot of these concerns about Planetside 2, which are basically newbie traps. If you've been around the game long enough, you know there's not a lot of hackers, you know that the battle flow is terrible, and you know that holding down the trigger for maximum RPM is a terrible way to try to get kills. And the minute differences in fire rates are not the determining factor in fights. I look forward to seeing more of his constructive criticism, especially on the forthcoming Planetside Arena, but on this comment, he missed on every mark. That's all for now, fellow Araxians. Until next time, I will see you, Planetside.